Welcome to the Godreports podcast.
I'm your host, Rebecca.
And I'm Sam.
We've been so inspired by the variety of ways God is at work across the globe.
Today's interview from 2011 is with Todd Burpo, a pastor and a volunteer fireman. Him and his wife have 4 kids.
When Colton, their middle child, was 4 years old, he suffered a burst appendix and was rushed to the hospital for an emergency surgery. Miraculously, he survived.
Afterwards, he started recounting vivid stories of heaven. His parents decided to put it in a book called Heaven is for Real.
Enjoy this interview that talks about heaven, the place that people down through the ages have been intrigued with.
Hello, it's Todd.
Hi, Todd. Mark Ellis.
Yes, Mark.
Well, I first want to
go.
I want to offer a praise report first related to your book.
Okay.
My wife and I took a trip back to Wisconsin to visit her relatives this summer. Mm-hmm. And her 84-year-old aunt had just read your book. Her husband had passed away. She had not attended church in probably 40 years. But it opened up a conversation that we were able to have with her, and she prayed to receive Christ.
Praise God.
Yeah, sitting next to a lake one morning with the two of us. So we left her that same day, traveled 4 hours across the state to visit Sally's other aunt who had turned 90. And the night before we flew back to California, we got into a conversation with her about heaven, prompted by your book, even though we told her how this other aunt had read it. It got us talking about heaven and whether or not she had assurance for heaven. She prayed to receive Christ with us at age 90. 2 days later, we had my father over for dinner and my mom. He's 80. And we got into a conversation about heaven with him based on your book. He prayed to receive Christ with us. And so 3 family members came to Christ within a 3-day period, either directly or indirectly related to your book.
Oh, well, praise God. People ask us all the time, do you know of any stories of people coming to Christ because of your book? Because you don't have a sinner's prayer at the end of it. So we get attacked for that all the time.
Oh, well, it just opening up the question of heaven for people is I think, just a huge gift, not to mention just, the vision that's portrayed there.
Well, the thing is, it's in the book. We talk about Colton. Dad, you have to have Jesus in your heart. It's in there. You can read the book. We didn't, he said it. We put it in there.
Yeah.
Talked about my granddad. How did he get to heaven? We talk about that. We don't walk away from it. And it's amazing to me how the Pharisees can't see it, but people like 84, 90-year-old and 80-year-old people can.
Yeah.
It's in there. Yeah. It's still the truth. Nothing's changed, and yet here a 4-year-old can present it in such a way that it touches people's hearts to where maybe the way the church has been doing it for so long turns people off.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you say to the people who may be skeptics, who may have trouble believing this amazing story, that perhaps it could have been fabricated or a product of imagination or something else? What do you say?
Well, for them, for those that are true skeptics, and they have questions, I understand. I mean, when my son started sharing things with me, I was like, how could this be true? Mm-hmm. And I questioned, and I was his dad, and I tried to be honest with that in the book, and I tried to come up with explanations for the information he was giving to me. And I tried to dismiss or explain away some of what he was saying, and I couldn't, because I was so close to him. I knew he couldn't make it up. I knew he couldn't make up stuff and have all the detailed information, like where we were in the hospital while he was in surgery, and be right. When he started sharing things about my grandfather, recognized a picture in the 1940s. I'm like, wow, there's no way anyone could make this up. Drugs can't produce this, you name it. But I was there and they weren't. And so I understand. I guess I don't have hostility towards them at all because I understand the questioning process. I went through to it. My advantage was I was just close. And, the one thing that I would say to them, though, to consider is this. Colton's been sharing this with his friends for many, 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 many years. This happened over 8 years ago. And matter of fact, some of his greatest defenders are his classmates when people attack him. They'll get on and they'll say, "You can't attack my friend. He told me all this back in the second grade,"
Yeah.
And we come from a small town. People in a small town have access to Colton all the time. And they've been able to test. They've been able to question. They've gone up to him, and they realize this comes from Colton. It doesn't come from me. And being from a small town, if anyone around here thought this was not true, don't you think they'd be out there and you'd be hearing them in the news, and you'd be hearing their rhetoric too? And that would be happening.
Yeah.
But this small town was the very same small town where people kept coming up to us. "You need to write this down. You need to share this with other people. You can't keep it to
Yeah.
So I think just the community we live in ought to hopefully give an honest skeptic, and I mean that very, very, very pointedly, an honest skeptic, some real evidence to build the response to. I think a lot of people that are dishonest just want to find a reason to walk away and not even consider it. And that's not honest. But an honest skeptic that's really looking for evidence, that's a big one to have to walk away from, to ignore.
Yes. Well, I'm very interested in what this has done to your ideas about prayer based on the fact that that Jesus sent Colton back to you based on that prayer that you uttered when you're in the depths of despair.
Yeah. Well, for me, I still can't tell you why he did it. I can tell you from Colton that he chose to. I can't tell you why he chose to. I think now, years later, you look at the book and you look at maybe some of the peace and the hope that people are finding, even your relatives, because of the story. And we can look back and go, oh, maybe God had a plan bigger than any of us could figure out at the time. But at that moment, all I can say about my prayer and what Colton told me, one, is I was really just very painfully honest with God about my hurts, my doubts, and I was mad at him, and he could handle it, just like Thomas. Thomas was mad when he demanded to see Christ's hands in the side, or else he wouldn't believe that he'd been raised from the dead. And Jesus handled Thomas too, Yeah,
it's somewhat like David in the cave of Adullam almost.
Yeah, well, sometimes we sit there and think, if I really let God know what I'm thinking, well, God, let me tell you, he already does. He already knows what you're thinking. And he can handle our problems, our doubts, our struggles. You can have a relationship with God unlike any other person, because I think even with our spouses, we hold some things about ourselves back, because if they find out what I've done, what I've thought, what I've been a part of, they were not going to respect me as much. And even my story shows that God already knows everything about you, and he still loves you anyway.
Yeah.
And he still will help you, and he'll still answer prayers, even if they're not prayed maybe the most reverent of ways. Secondly, I knew I needed to make it right. I wasn't proud of what I did. The first thing I had to do was confess that to other people. Hey, I screamed at the God who was holding my kid, and that was wrong. And I've had people ask me, well, now you wrote in the book and everyone's reading about it. Doesn't that make you feel bad? And again, the answer is, well, no. I know I felt convicted at the time when my son told me that. But when you confess your sin, you can be forgiven, and you can feel that just as strongly and just as assuredly as you can feel conviction. And when I knew that God had forgiven me for that, it's okay for me to share that struggle with other people.
Well, I don't know that even fazed me as much as just the amazing response that he answered your prayer. I mean,
for me, the last thing is, I obviously feel indebted.
Yeah.
What does the Bible say? The life you now live, you shouldn't live for yourself because you were bought at a price. As Christians, shouldn't we all feel indebted? But we don't. we look at that cross and we walk away from it and we think, oh man, isn't God lucky to have me on his side, you know? Mm-hmm. And we should all feel indebted. But I'll be honest, when I heard that from my son, did I feel especially indebted to God? That I really owed him a thank you that had to be more than told by just words? You bet I did. You know, yeah.
I was very amazed at his description of the throne room of God, and that God is so big he can hold the earth in his hands.
Yeah.
That's a hard one for me to get my mind around, that he could see Jesus, he could see Gabriel, the Holy Spirit, he could see the throne, and how could he be that big? Do you have any...
Well, here's some things that I've struggled with, because I understand, because people ask him, well, what does God's face look like? He's like, Dad, it's hard to remember because he's so big I couldn't almost see it. And now in the children's book, obviously there's kind of a depiction there from an illustrator, but to kind of put it in perspective, it probably doesn't capture the size of God, with Jesus sitting next to him, size dimensionally wise, but in a children's book it's probably as close a depiction as you can come up with and still have a picture that a child can see on a page, Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when he describes Michael and Gabriel, and he does in the children's book, there's more information about heaven than, it's not new information to us, but it is to the reader, because not everything can make it in one book. He can say, well, Dad, Michael, he's the biggest of the angels, and he's twice as tall as you. So he has something to compare Michael by,
Yeah.
Dad, I know how tall you are, Dad, and Michael's twice as tall as you.
Isn't that something?
Here's God. What would he have to say, well, God's 5 times, 2 times, or 3 times bigger than what? I mean, he's got nothing to compare God to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was in New York City for the first time. And I'm sitting there looking around at the smells, the noise, the crowd, the people, the concrete, and I'm sitting here thinking, where's the grass, And if I go back to Nebraska, what's the first thing I tell the people about, how do I describe New York? And then I was reminded, here's my almost 4-year-old trying to do the same thing to me about heaven.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, so the whole size thing with God, he has nothing to measure God by. He can't say so many feet and height, and he was just a little kid.
Yeah, yeah. But still, the idea that he could hold the world in his hand, it's a beautiful picture, and yet it's startling that, because if you imagine what that size would have to be.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's one of those things that I understand how hard it would be for him to describe it and explain it.
Yeah.
And is he spot on? I don't know.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now, are there additional details or memories that have surfaced that did not make it in the book?
Yeah, there's quite a few more memories and stuff that are in a children's book.
Okay.
The children's book, it's Heaven is for Real for Kids, is the same and yet different book because it's all first-person Colton. It's not third-person Dad.
Ah.
The other thing is the children's book starts with Colton leaving the hospital, and it ends with Colton coming back to the hospital.
Huh.
So everything about the kids' book is about heaven.
Okay.
With adults, going back to the skeptics you already talked about, we have to explain to them what happened, how did Colton get sick, how's the kids don't want to know that stuff.
Right.
And so we could actually spend a lot more time just on heaven in the kids' book than we could in the adult book.
Okay. So in a sense, you're almost recommending even adults should look at the children's book.
Oh, well, I think everybody loves pictures,
Yeah.
And Wilson Ong was our illustrator, and he did a very good job of reproducing Colton's memories written on the page, in pictures, and then the words are Colton's. Matter of fact, they're coming out with an app here just shortly, where you can buy the book on app and record your voice. Your kids can listen to Colton read the book to them. And while we were making that recording, the person said, man, Colton nailed this the first time. When I work with a kid, it usually takes quite a while for him to read it and get it. And he nailed it. I go, well, he wrote it. And the guy looks at me and goes, oh, that makes sense. I mean, this is his story. Of course he's going to nail it.
Yeah, wonderful.
So that's why it's different, and it's probably better.
Yeah, good. Well, why do you think he saw so many kids in heaven? Do you have any theory about that?
Well, I think for probably a couple. One, he's right. Heaven has gobs of kids in it. I mean, when you look at how Jesus responded to kids, I mean, the one time that he got really mad at his disciples was when they blocked the kids,
Sure.
Think about all the stupid things his disciples did. They didn't have the faith to cast out demons at times. They didn't believe him when he told them he was going to raise from the dead. And many times he said, how long shall I put up with you? He was talking to his disciples. But the time he got really mad at them, and they kept bickering with each other, who was going to be the greatest. They were acting like kids,
Mm-hmm.
But the time he got mad at them is when they blocked the kids.
Yeah.
I think you find out a lot about someone when you find out what ticks them off. That's how important kids are to Jesus. So why wouldn't heaven be full of them?
Well, except that an 80-year-old man would appear as a 30-year-old man in heaven. There seems to be this age.
Yes, that sounds pretty good to me.
Right. But wouldn't it?
We know in the Bible it says that there's no death or dying in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And we know Revelations teaches that.
Yeah.
Well, if you age in heaven, how do you keep from dying?
Mm-hmm.
And Colton's memory is like, well, Dad, you age to your prime and then you stop aging.
Ah.
That's a very good explanation as to how you don't die in heaven. You don't age beyond your prime.
Interesting. So the kids that he saw would age to roughly 30 or something, and then
well,
stop.
When he describes his sister that he met in heaven, everyone says, oh, Colton met his little sister, and he's quick to correct him. She was not my little sister. She was my big sister.
Ah.
She was never born. But she had aged to where she was Colton's big sister, not little sister.
Okay. Well, that helps clarify it for me. Any clue about?
Well, matter of fact, when you look at the children's book, my favorite picture, now this is Dad, is one whole page is just him being hugged by his sister and my granddad.
Oh.
And that's my favorite picture in the book.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't say anything about babies, though, as in aborted babies.
Well, he said that, there's some things he doesn't know, but he says there's lots of babies, and he says, the women in heaven, and especially he talks about Mary, is involved with raising the kids.
Really?
Yeah, he spends a lot of time how a lot of the ladies in heaven, that's what they do.
Interesting.
They help these children, and they raise them, they're with them. And another thing he talks about is how Pop was with him to help him and be alongside. How many people at funerals have this hope or this dream that, my grandmother's watching my child. Mm-hmm. My mother that went on is already there with my baby that didn't make it.
Yeah.
And they have that peace at funerals, or they have that hope. And here I'm a parent whose son says, Dad, that's how it is. Your grandpa was taking care of me when I was in heaven. He was taking care of my sister, too.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. So you can see how the children's book just kind of takes that up to another level.
Yes.
Yeah. So Colton says it's the better book, and he's probably right.
Yeah. Now, I thought I saw somewhere on a video on the internet that he saw David.
Yes.
How did he describe David, or what?
Well, I haven't talked about him a whole lot in trying to pull it out of him, but he will tell you that King David and Samson were two of his favorite Bible characters that he met in heaven.
Yeah.
And he always talks about how nice they were.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how David would just show him around and help him around heaven, and if you needed someone to help, he just went to David a lot for help. He talks about it, how he was there to help him around and all, and you're just kind of like, and he just talks about him like he's just a normal guy, Dad. Well, you're kind of like, but he specifically remembered that was King David, yeah.
Isn't that something? Did he describe David or Samson?
He does, but right now I'm kind of thinking, oh man, I don't remember exactly his specific descriptions of them.
Okay.
I do know that, like Mary, he describes her as being just a little bit taller than his mom.
Okay.
And what she was wearing, the color of her clothes and stuff. We have things like that on our FAQ page on our website for people to look up.
Okay.
And Colton's answered a lot of these questions like this, and it's what he can remember down there, so people can find those.
Okay.
And that's at hifrministries.org.
Say that again,
HIFR for Heaven is for Real, just abbreviate that. HIFR Ministries, plural, .org.
Ministries.org. Okay.
And there you go. And then there's an FAQ page where many of these questions that you had, we've put them out there, and Colton's tried to answer them.
Oh, wonderful. Is there much that he said? I thought there was a reference to the end times somewhere in the...
Oh, yeah. About the final battle.
Yeah. What is...
We don't have that in the children's book, but in the trade book we talk about it, where, he talks about that there's going to be a war. Mm-hmm. And the Bible describes a final war where, Colton's descriptions are where Jesus, the angels, and the good people are going to fight Satan, the monsters, and the bad people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And when you look in Revelations, it talks about the angels and the elect and so forth, and but like he says, Dad, he saw Satan. Jesus wins. I saw him throw Satan into hell. And you sit there as he describes that. And here's a little guy. He hasn't read Revelations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's pretty well given you. Matter of fact, later on, which we didn't have in the trade book, when he described Satan, this is how he described him to me. Dad, why do I remember a dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns? That doesn't make sense. Now, what does John describe him as in Revelations?
Yes.
He's got the number of heads and crowns right even. I just looked at him and I said, Colton, well, whatever you saw and whatever John saw was the same thing.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, amazing. And he also says his problem about Satan is, well, sometimes he looks like an angel too. And I don't mean he looks like an angel because he says his light was extinguished a long time ago, Dad, but he has wings like an angel. And he even goes on, he says, Dad, they showed me where he used to have a throne. Do you know Satan had a throne in heaven, but he doesn't anymore. It's gone.
Isn't that amazing?
Things that a little kid, no way do they get taught that stuff in church and can put that stuff together,
Well, how long was he actually in heaven? This is fantastic. The amount of...
Oh, yeah, it's incredible what he says, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what was that time frame from an earthly perspective?
Well, he doesn't remember this, but I do. When he was just out of the hospital and I was first struggling, how could this be? I asked him the question, Colton, how long were you gone? And while he's busy playing, I was interrupting his playtime, okay? And obviously at 4, playing is a lot more important to Dad. And I remember him looking at me and go, oh, Dad, I was there 3 minutes. And then he turns off and then goes off to play. And he doesn't remember that today. He said, well, I don't remember that. But I'll never forget that conversation I had with him.
Yeah, yeah.
But, people say, well, can you explain that? And the answer is no, I can't. But I can give you maybe something to chew on. Peter said that like with God and in the book of 1 Peter, a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day. And I don't know if you remember that.
I was thinking of that passage,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you kind of do the math, if a day equals 1,000 years, what does 3 minutes equal? Well, 3 minutes on that timetable would equal like 2 years and 1 month. So is that correct? I don't know, but that's the best I can give you.
Yeah, but it does seem like what was a compressed time period here on Earth in the time that he was gone seemed like there was much more than he could have experienced.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
But, obviously the truth that is undeniable is God operates outside of time. Mm-hmm. I mean, when the prophets thousands and thousands of years ago can see things and write things that have happened in the future since our being born, and they predict things that are still yet to come, the only way they can do that is God can be in the present and in the future and tell them both the same. I mean, time does not limit God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the one thing that we already know is fact, but how long was Colton gone? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Does he say much about worship and that what he saw in terms of worship?
Well, his favorite place was the throne room of God. Mm-hmm. And, of course, he talks about you can always hear people singing and you can just feel the love of God in heaven, but you can understand what everyone's saying. And a lot of that more is in the children's book. He talks about that. Mm-hmm. But his favorite place was the throne room of God. And so when it comes to being in God's presence there, that was his favorite place to be.
Okay. Has Colton ever met this young woman, Akiana?
No, he hasn't.
Okay.
So far, I think Akiana now, if I'm right, is probably about 18.
Okay.
But when she painted that painting of Prince of Peace, she would have been 8.
Okay.
So I think she probably painted that about 10 years ago, and Colton's experience would have been about 8.5 years ago.
Okay.
So time-wise, I'm not sure if I'm right or not, or if she's 16 now, but I think she's either 16 or 18, but I think she's right knocking on the door of 18, but she lives in Lithuania now, from what I understand.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a trip.
Right. Well, did the image surprise you? Because to me it resembles a very contemporary kind of Jesus, not the classic Jesus of the paintings that I grew up with.
Yeah.
Did that image surprise you?
Well, actually, I don't know. When I look at it, it captivates me.
Mm-hmm.
The other images that we see with the long curly hair and stuff and whatever, I don't know. Those never seem to draw me in, but this one sure does.
Yeah. Well, he even said he has blue eyes, which surprised me.
Well, bluish, blue-green eyes. Well, here's two things, too. We know in the Bible that Jesus was a carpenter. He was kind of a tradesman. He was, I don't know. This looks more like a man's man type picture.
Yeah, right.
And to me, that would fit the biblical account. Now, one of the other things, too, that gets me with Colton, he says, Dad, the eyes are just so pretty. And you look at these eyes. Now, a lot of people attack Colton here, and they say, well, Jesus was a Jew. He couldn't have had blue eyes.
Right.
Well, they must not read their Bibles. I don't know, because the Bible does not say Jesus was a Jew. It says he was half Jew.
Interesting. Yeah.
His mom was a Jew, but his dad wasn't, right?
Right, yeah, the Holy Spirit.
The virgin birth thing, It's kind of like, you don't believe that or what?
Right,
And it's these people that attack him, and they say the Bible says, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. It says he was born of God, the Son of God. He was not a full Jew. His mother was, but his dad wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe he was the son of God or the son of Joseph? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And so, was he a Jew? No, the Bible does not say he was.
Yeah. Very interesting. It's tweaking all of our understanding of things we thought were settled, right?
Oh, exactly. But, I mean, when you look at the Bible, these people the Bible doesn't teach what you just said it does.
Now, he talked about doing work, or homework or work. Is there any...
Now, for him, it was homework. Now, a thing that a lot of people question in the book is, how did he see so many things? Like the end times, my past, the Holy Spirit being shot down with power, and then he saw Satan, and then this and that. How could he see so many things?
Mm-hmm.
Well, his answer is Jesus was his teacher. Jesus showed him.
Wow.
And his favorite thing was to go to class with Jesus being his teacher, and he had homework.
Huh.
Yeah.
Isn't that remarkable?
Now, he knew it had to be heaven because he hates homework down here.
Oh, too much.
I guess the class all goes back to the teacher, doesn't it?
Right. Well, I was an assistant pastor for 9 years and also do the writing on the side, but I still am in a preaching rotation and have the opportunity to do that every couple months. So this idea of Jesus shooting down power when you preach is just such a wonderful picture to me.
Yeah, how would a child describe that,
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about anointing, and here's a kid just putting it in his words. It's kind of like the markers in Jesus' hands. He didn't know what to call that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was homework for him, but it sounds like that there are a lot of kinds of work going on in heaven, or some kind of like the women helping to raise the children.
Yeah. And heaven is not a place. And I think we all breathe a big sigh of relief, especially if you're like me, where you just stand in the choir and sing the whole time.
Right.
Now don't get me wrong, I appreciate music, and I like worship.
Yeah.
Man, God obviously put more in me than just that.
Yeah.
As a created being, I have a lot more desires in my heart than just singing. And I was made by God. Heaven is a place where we get to be completely fulfilled and complete, and it's a place where the paradise I think God wanted us to live in without sin, you know?
Yeah.
The best way to probably describe it, of course, biblically, is it's Christ's inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hell is Satan's inheritance.
Mm.
And if you think about what Satan deserves, man, how bad is hell going to be, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And if you think of how good, what type of inheritance does Christ deserve?
Mm-hmm.
And down here we get to pick whose inheritance we get to share in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, how many books have been sold at this point?
We're right around the 6 million number.
6 million books. Is that a startling thing to you?
Well, for me, it obviously is hard to understand, but it incredibly startling to my publisher. You know.
Yeah.
Wow, this is such a big deal. You know, my publisher has tried to, my editor especially, has tried to explain it to me how big this is many times, because she understands that I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah.
She's like, Todd, you just don't get it. She said the odds of this happening are like 3 in a million, and she put all this stuff together to try and figure it out to kind of give me a number to go just how big this is, you know.
Yeah. Well, just the sense of your family being chosen to impart this is a very special privilege, I think.
Well, it's one of those things that we didn't ask for.
Yeah.
And I know even last month I had a doctor ask me, I was speaking at a hospital, if knowing everything you know now, and you knew it was going to turn out the same way, would you do this again? Mm-hmm. And that was a pretty tough question to have to face, but my answer I didn't have to think about, and my answer was no. And he goes, what? I go, well, watching your child about die, I don't ever want to go through that again.
Mm.
I mean, I can't tell you how awful that was.
Yeah.
I can't. No, it was so gut-wrenching that even though I know the results that I know now, I would probably still say no.
Yeah.
If I had my choice. So this was done to us. It wasn't because we were super spiritual or you name it. Most of the things that happened to us were completely out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because of us. Evidently, you know, it was because of God that this happened. And I want people to know that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just been a pleasure to talk with you, and just the impact of this book. I pray it continues to have bring forth a great harvest for God's kingdom, and it's just a real treasure.
Thank you for listening to this inspiring interview. For more stories, go to Godreports.com.